Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 338 of Humanity Rising. Over the last couple of days, we've been contemplating the issue of wholeness and fragmentation. Yesterday, we had a marvelous dialogue around the physics of David Bohm, who you may remember is a contemporary of Albert Einstein. And while most of the physicists were looking at the world and the cosmos from the point of view of particularity, it was David Bohm who looked at the universe from the point of view of wholeness and developed the theories related to what he called the implicit order, the notion that everything that is interconnected with everything else, and that in fact, every little node of being contains within it the totality of everything in a living, conscious web of life. He was actually ostracized by the physics community for many, many years, but stayed very true to his deep intuitions and his mathematical equations about the unity of being. Today, we want to carry forward that notion, but within the context of human culture, which rather than being whole, has been fragmented in ways that are obvious and observable to all of us. And one of the great contributing factors to the fragmentation of the world has been the institution of patriarchy, which was dominant in world culture for thousands of years until the middle, I would say, of the 20th century, when women en masse began to liberate themselves, and attention for the first time really in human history was drawn to the environment and how the existing patriarchal order had decimated the environment. Women, animals, everything was subordinated in a coercive and destructive way. As Humanity Rising has been flourishing over the last 338 days, we've been contemplating many, many issues pertaining to the pandemic, to human affairs at this critical time in human history, where every choice matters as we reach a denouement, largely initiated by global warming and the climate emergency in which we find ourselves, and the urgent imperative on the part of our species to re-examine itself in a fundamental way. And that requires a deep exploration of how we've governed ourselves through a patriarchal world order that has left us on the brink of the precipice and the very real possibility now of extinction. So these issues that we've been developing have been very consequential, I would say, but they're always done in a Socratic form, in a way of eliciting questions rather than delivering answers. It's the spirit of inquiry. It's the spirit of not knowing that is particularly important in a time such as ours, where the closely knit world of cause and effect is now so tightly wound that anything can ricochet through our world with both positive and devastating consequences. So today, we want to look at the reality of men, the future of men, as we are all emerging out of a patriarchal vice grip that has been deeply disturbing to ecology and to human affairs. Before we dive in, let us pause, as we always do at the beginning of our Humanity Rising sessions, and just take a moment and center yourself in your body. Take a breath, close your eyes, And for just a minute or so, tune yourself to your heart. Listen to your heartbeat in a spirit of gratitude and deep thanksgiving that you're alive. We're all alive at this most extraordinary moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. Now, with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude and love for each and every one of you who are joining our program today, I want to just very briefly recall that over the last 6 months or so, one day each month, we've been convening panels of men and women around the issue of men and both our responsibilities for the present global predicament, how we can liberate ourselves as women are liberating themselves, obviously in very different ways, but with a view of coming into a more egalitarian, abundant relationship with ecology and the various genders and forms of sexuality that are emerging in our time. And today we want to have our last monthly session before what we're calling our masculine dialogues, which will be convened between the 15th and the 19th of November, 5-day program, twice a day, which we'll be talking about in more detail at the end of this program. But I just wanted to frame our conversation today, and we thought we would end our preparation for our masculine dialogues by gathering some of the women who we know are very thoughtful and contemplative about men, who will share with us for the next hour their views on this problematic phenomenon called the male. So I'd like to introduce Heidi Sparks-Gruber, who will moderate the panel. She's well known to many of you. She's been working, she was the founder of Four Quadrant Partners, worked with Peter Senge for many, many years in the Society for Organizational Learning. She's been an organizational consultant in leadership and organizational development, not only here in North America, but in Europe and around the world, and is very well versed in these matters. So Heidi, welcome to Humanity Rising, and I turn the program over to you. And then when Heidi and the women have finished, George Capellini and I will comment and we'll talk together and we'll tee up the masculine dialogues in November. Heidi, please.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Before we begin, I do want to say a little bit about each person. I know that all of you got to read their longer bios in joining this call, but there's a couple of things that I think each of the people on this call bring to the table that I would like to highlight before we start. The first is Esperide Ananas Ametista. As you know, she's a socio-psychologist, energy therapist, spiritual facilitator and healer, an expert in meditation and creative visualization. As I was reading her bio, I was struck with this statement. For many years, she has conducted research into ritual since ancient time and led hundreds of people to retrieve memories of the vastness of their presence through time. I think this is a unique perspective that Esperide is bringing to this conversation. I just want to call that out. Sedina Capinelli, as you know, is an award-winning author and an expert in individual organization and societal change. She's a producer of this fabulous series for Ageless Living, in which 22 award-winning wisdom keepers are accessible to all of us. The thing I want to call out about Sedina is that her recent work has been in how inner beauty leads to outer beauty. And so I think she has a lot to say about how the inner state impacts what happens in the outer world, especially through women and our partners, men. Celeste is a founder and president of the Celeste Kruger Associates, which has specialized in leadership and organizational development, particularly around defining purpose, both for the individuals in an organization and the organization themselves, and delivering that with passion. And I've been on a number of dialogues with Celeste, and I must say that you can count on her to bring to every dialogue a deeply spiritual and holistic view in which there is no other. That's what I always am reminded of when I'm with Celeste, and I'm really glad you're on this call, Celeste. Anelos Smitsman is the founder and CEO of Earthwise Center. And visionary scientist, published author, futurist, system architect, and leadership catalyst for the transition to thrivable civilization. I love that her groundbreaking PhD dissertation was about the heart of systems change, or how we diagnose and transform key systemic barriers of our world. And there's a proposed transition plan for that. But Anelos, we're looking for you about how this relationship we have with our men is really one of the masculine, not our men, but the masculine spirit is really maybe one of the systemic barriers, how we look at it, how we approach it. And I can't wait to hear what you have to say about that. My background has been since the 70s, has been part of the human potential movement, and particularly around transformation, either individual, organizational, societal, for the last 40 years. I would like to say, though, that I have recently a new reason to care about this conversation, and that is that I'm a new grandmother. I was a sister with 3 brothers, no sisters. Then I had all girls, and now all of my nieces and my daughters are having all boys. So help, what do we tell them? What is this role that these little ones are entering into the society? And I really need this conversation. So the conversation is about, there's this eternal question about what do women want? And we've been invited by our brothers to share our observations and our view and our vision of what the transformation of men in contemporary society might look like and the roles that they can play in this world. So I'm going to open it up to you to say whatever your heart brings to this conversation. And I'm going to stop for a minute and see who would like to start.
I'll start, Heidi.
Thank you, Celeste.
Yeah. I'm excited to be with you again, too. And Sedina, you and I've worked together, but the 2 that I haven't met, this is the most inviting thing I've had happen in several days, to be able to meet 2 new good women who have an angle on all of this. So thank you for joining. I've been thinking a lot about this, Heidi. What do we want from men? What do I want from men? And I think that's the problem. I think that's the question that gets us tangled up. What do we want from them? I think I'm finding myself convicted with what can I do with myself to resolve my own inner struggle about the who I am as a woman and how I relate with the parts of myself that I might call, in our North American language, male or masculine. I think the mistake, I'll speak for myself, I think the mistake I've made most of my life, certainly until well into my 40s, was I thought that they needed to change out there and that the patriarchy needed to do something, damn it, about itself. And if I were just loud enough and clear enough about it, then maybe we'd get somewhere. But I don't think that's it at all. For me, how we begin to unlock the gridlock is inside. And with the places that my expectations are unrealistic, unfair, and about the other instead of about me. So that is not to say that misogyny isn't rampant. It certainly is. But I first want to begin with my own internalized look at how I hold misogyny in my body, in my consciousness, in myself, and what I can do to deconstruct that and take blame away from outside. Let's start the healing here. That would be my ground.
Celeste, that's beautiful. Thank you. Esperide, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. I'm also very excited to meet you, all of you, and to be in this conversation. So I've been thinking a lot about this question. I have an answer to what I would like to see in men and what it is that I would like from men, and also something to comment on what Celeste was saying, because I think it's the key to this whole conversation. But my answer to what I would like to see men have more of in these coming times is courage. Really courage to take action, courage to feel, inside of themselves, and the courage to be the masculine principle where the feminine principle can rest upon, to be the container and the terrain on which life and everything can grow. And I think in order to do this, we have to understand that the masculine and the feminine are both inside of us, a little bit what Celeste was saying. And Heidi, you were saying in the beginning, you were struck by that sentence that I've been working a lot with past lives. So I have for many, many years, and it's still one of my main fields of research. And if we enter into that way of feeling, which is not a way of thinking, but feeling that we're not just now, we also realize that I am now in the body of a woman, but I have been a man. And actually, somewhere in time, I still am a man, because time is not linear. It's linear in our perception, but that essence that is our soul is living all these experiences contemporaneously. Right? So I am now a woman here, but I can be a man in ancient Rome or, somewhere else. So if we can start feeling this and embrace the fact that we are time beings, we also see how all these different facets are inside of ourselves. And this is not to justify anything, but just to say, well, maybe there is in me a part that has already faced these problems, that has already found a way to solve them, or also a part in which I've been responsible for the problems. So there's no need to put any blame outside, but just to see how is it the best way to change. And I think this takes courage also from us women, and from the men. So I would say courage is what I would like to see from all of us now.
Anna Lois, you're shaking your head as have you some responses to what we're hearing?
That's right. I'm taking this in fully. I really love this and so glad to be in this conversation. Got several things that emerged for me, and I've also been reflecting on this question a lot. And indeed, rather for me also, rather than saying what I want from men, there's something I would like to invite men to explore with us. And that is very deeply this feminine principle also in them. And of course, it's the same for women. And then especially the feminine principle that is the sacred darkness, because I feel that this has been left out so much. And in fact, as a system scientist, it was very interesting how, what happened to the story also about life and evolution, where we see that we have all these laws and these theories around the Big Bang or the big outbreath. So that whole journey of expansion, and if we're looking also at our society, of course, and the problems of a sustainability crisis, it's all about this story. I remember when I was talking with my dear friend Jude Curfin, and we were exploring the different cosmologies, and I was saying to Jude, tell me, you've been telling me about the expansion of space-time and the flows of time, and the diversification, increasing complexity as a story of evolution. But what are physicists saying today about the contraction? So if there is this movement within our universe that expands, materializes, manifests, there must be simultaneously another movement that coheres, that contracts, that acts like a womb. And where is that story? It's not in our science, it's not in education, it's not in our economic models, it's not in our governance models. And I felt like that is for me, that's so deeply the feminine principle. And instead in our societies, we have made the contraction, the womb, the darkness as anti-progress, anti-growth, as a threat. And so I'd love to invite men to really deeply explore within themselves that feminine principle of the contraction, of the integrative, of the cohering, of the darkness, of allowing yourself to be comfortable in that unknown, and to see what that does for you, and of course for us as women as well, and to see how by bringing that back in our story and in also what we see as reality, what can change through that transformational journey.
I said, wow.
I want to say wow too, Heidi.
Dana, I know you have a lot to say
Wow.
about what we just heard.
Goodness. I usually jump right in. I'm so glad I waited because, wow. First of all, I'm so pleased to be part of this. I think this is a very crucial dialogue to be having. And I'm so grateful to be included with this stellar group of women. And loving meeting the two of you, and I always love being with Heidi and Celeste. Since I first heard about this, I'm going to go with what Jim said, something about not knowing and being an inquiry, and just put out some of my comments, because some of the things I've been thinking about have been touched on by every one of you. I really believe that we need to go back to the beginning, to our roots as human beings, not as exclusively feminine or masculine. It's clear that we're in the midst of this huge turning point, massive transformation. The old ways are deconstructing. And I believe one of the reasons this is happening is to open us to new possibilities for evolving into our divine selves. And some of that was already touched on. After all, we're divine, having a human experience, and it seems to me that we're being given an opportunity to come closer to the reality of our birthright. But just as, the Chinese ideogram for crises also means opportunity, I believe this seismic shift and crises is being created so that we can create a new balance. Jim outlined really well in the opening that the role of the masculine has been for millennia brutal and overbearing, and it's been a reality that's persisted for so long that I don't believe our hearts can take it anymore. That's what's happening. So I envision a new role for the masculine, like all of you dear women here, that's more aligned with the positive masculine traits that men already have. They have so many beautiful traits, right? They're the action and self-reliance, and they set boundaries between right and wrong, and sometimes they fight the good fight, and they're being an ally and a protector of women, of children, of the earth, of those in harm's way. I think I keep coming up with this, the role of the gentleman, and there's still gentlemen around. And I just have a real fondness for that role. The respectful, thoughtful gentleman who's a friend to those in need and who protects the dignity of women and children. You know, it kept coming to mind when George and I were in Mexico the last time, how you would pass men and they would tip their hat to you and nod their head to you. It was just such a beautiful, you know, traditional way of respecting a woman. And it always made my heart open. I don't know about all of you. That's the kind of the gentle goodness is what I want to see more of, because I feel that that's the beauty within all of us. We have this goodness already. So how can we, you know, how can we expand into it? We all have an internal and an eternal masculine and feminine. And I think one of you did say that. I see the masculine living into both sides of these intrinsic traits and embracing more innate feminine traits and qualities. Intuition, receptivity, all the things that they also have already there. So I'm not sure how we can encourage them to do that, but allowing the heart to tell the truth rather than relying exclusively on the mind. So there were so many wonderful things said, unlocking the gridlock inside, Celeste. That's where I see yes, absolutely. We have a beauty inside of us and it has darkness and light to it. We all have this. So embracing the darkness as well. That's the wholeness that was started off in the conversation that Jim started. And the contraction, that was so beautiful, what you were saying, Annalise, that, you know, is taking place. And I so agree. Courage. Courage, Esperide, is what needs to happen right now in our world. And we need to give it to each other. And it's a dialogue, so I'll stop there. I'll jump in later. Thanks.
So I have a few responses and also lots of questions about how to take this into every day, right? Into our interactions. My response is, as I'm listening to you, I was so touched, Sadina, when you described what it's like to be greeted by a gentleman. As I was thinking about this dialogue, I was thinking about what are the qualities I want my daughters to have from their partners, and fortunately they have them. But I think it was a long conversation as the girls were growing up in a world where the feminist movement was raging, and at the time they were teenagers. And it seemed like the perfect opportunity for them to establish their place in the world. And I remember at that time, I had a spiritual teacher who reminded me that she happened to be a woman in this embodiment, Esperide. And she said to me, you know, it's been known for ages that women could do anything they had to do. We really can do anything we had to do. The question is whether that's really the most generous way to live, right? And I brought that into my interactions with my daughters, that yeah, you know, there was one moment, very quotidian kind of example, where they invited their boyfriends over as teenagers to have a cookout with us. And my daughters started running around, moving all the deck furniture so that everybody would be seated at the table. And the boys were just standing there like, okay, so where's my part? What's my role? And I just took them aside and I said, look, you can move the deck furniture if you want, but why not let them do it for you? And they stepped back, and the young men just stepped in and started taking care of the situation. And there was that glow that you described about being greeted by a gentleman. There was something that happened to the girls and the young boys in that situation that was a different quality of possibility and love. There was love there. And so the question for me is, you know, one of the things about courage for what? One of those would be courage for allowing yourself to be taken care of, allowing yourself to be protected. Yes, you can do it, but it doesn't allow anyone else to participate, right? Which is very much what you're talking about, Celeste, this gridlock of like not allowing. I remember when the feminist movement first started, and men would say to me, you know, I would offer to open the door for you, or you're going to bite my head off, right? And that was kind of, yes, where does that love go if we don't allow each other to do what we have to offer with each other, to be it together? The other thing about courage is the courage to, I am so clear that reflection, collective reflection and listening is critical now, critical in a time where we're so divided in every way. And so it's the courage to listen, to reflect, and to take action together. That it's all preceded by humility and not knowing. The humility of not knowing what our role is now, not knowing what is the most powerful way to use ourselves in a world that is so rapidly changing and moving. So that's my reflection on what I'm hearing in you. I have a question. Anelos, when you talked about the sacred darkness and the contraction, I was fascinated because that is my inner experience of what's going on all the time. And I'm wondering what has been your experience and how to bring that into a conversation or how to bring that into interactions. How do you touch on that with our men or our masculine partners or our masculinity within ourselves? What does that look like in actual interaction?
Thank you. Yes, actually, it's a very intimate conversation with the man, because for me, that is the womb. Yeah, and all men have come from the womb, just like us women. You know, our first experience of human life is inside the womb. So if the contraction doesn't take place, if you're looking at when we are pregnant, you know, the cervix won't open if the womb doesn't start to contract from the top, creating the pressure on the cervix for it then to open. So the contraction is so incredibly important to enable, to catalyze the birth. So usually when I start to have that conversation with the man, is to bring them back to that womb. How does a womb feeling feel? How does it feel to be held? How does it also feel to be contained? And now imagine that this contraction, rather than it being restrictive, rather than it being something that you have to fight against to overcome, is actually an intelligence of life that holds you, that allows you to let go, to be received, to be held, and that somehow knows your right timing to emerge, so that you don't have to push yourself through life. You don't have to make yourself emerge, which is so often I feel the kind of disconnected masculine that has harmed a lot of men as well. But that is womb, this intelligence, this feminine wisdom knows them now when it's time to contract. So it doesn't contract your consciousness, it contracts the old state so that it prepares you to emerge into a new state where you learn to surrender gently. And I feel that when I have that conversation with men, often this is also when the tears come. And you know that they don't have that courage doesn't mean for them to always be first, always be upfront, always having to know the answers, but that it really can also mean the courage to surrender, to know that when I fall back, I'm being held too. I'm not always having to be the one that holds everything together, but that life itself holds us. Yeah, that's
sounds like heaven.
Thank you.
Esperide, you have your hand up.
Thank you. I wanted to elaborate a little more on this idea of courage, and I love the way you have, Heidi, how you really have brought it to life. But in Italian, courage is coraggio, and it comes from cor, which means heart, e raggio, which means ray. So in Italian, coraggio means to have a ray that comes from your heart. So it's that kind of quality that I'm talking about, the courage to really, you know, that you are so able to accept, in our case, this changing, this transformation, that we don't know really what the new roles are going to be, but that you can be so open that there is a ray of love, of course, an energy that comes from your heart. So this is why I chose courage, because it comes from a very profound meaning. And the other thing, I think one of the, for me at least in these times, one of the important things to be courageous about, I think it is to accept the fact that yes, we're equal, but we're not the same. So as we're embodied as men and women, we do have different bodies. We do have different brains. We do perceive reality in a different way. And if we can accept this as being equal and the wealth, the richness of the difference, then we stop fighting. We stop fighting with each other, and we stop fighting with the masculine and the feminine within us. And then we can become again fully divine. But if we are looking to be equal, that means being exactly the same in everything, 50-50 on everything, I think we're all going to be unhappy. Because in order to be a gentleman, I think a man also wants to be seen as one. Men want us to look at them as our heroes, as the archetype of the knight in the shiny armor. And very often we don't do this with our men. We don't give them that space. And then how can they become it? Yes. If their mothers, their girlfriends, their sisters do not ever cultivate that aspect of them. So we need to have the courage to say, we know that as women, we can do it all. Very often we also in these times do it better, but let's give them the space to take back what they can be so that they can give it to us in return.
That's great. I mean, we've all been raised contracted, in that, building on what Anna said about using that contraction to signal the expansion rather than to close further down, is what you're describing to me. Celeste, and then Sedina.
Thanks, Heidi. Anna, I loved listening to you just a moment ago. My experience was this tremendous benevolence coming through. And why I in the immediate moment call that out is because as I've listened to each of you already this morning, what I notice are some qualities that are so inherent when women of good faith come together. And I don't think that that's limited to us, but I experience it here, and I want more of it from men. So I'll just make that declaration. I experience kindness and a genuineness and a clarity and directness that is enfolded in something very natural, just an ease in the way that each of you are sharing your points of view. And the way I'm experiencing it is that there's healing in the cycle of this speaking and listening part, even though we're these little postage stamps on a screen spread all over the globe. Somehow that energetic field connects. And I think that's a natural gift that shows up in spaces like this. I also want to juxtapose that with something I'm feeling as we're talking together, and that is our language is rather binary. It's we're talking in rather classic Western, I think, terms about masculine and feminine, and those are valuable. They're useful archetypes. I'm also reflecting and remembering that a couple of nights ago, our granddaughter and her boyfriend were at our dinner table talking about this radical evolution they're experiencing with their own friends. These are young people in their mid-20s, all around gender fluidity, sexual identity development. What does it mean? I mean, they're talking about this and talking to us. My guy is in his mid-70s. I'm almost 60, and I'm listening to them talk about, it's not about male and female, it's about the parts of ourselves that are all blended within this body. What does it mean to experience partnership and the masculine in Western language if two women are together, or if two people who identify as male are together? There's this whole new language that in our lifetimes is emerging. And I think I want to call it forward, because part of the healing, I believe, I sense, is therein. Somewhere in this, we no longer are boxing ourselves in, is part of the solution and the natural order.
Yes, thank you, Celeste. Sedina.
Yeah, thank you, Celeste. That was great. I have a niece who has gone through a sex change, and this is a young woman that I grew up with. And when I was a model, she was my child in all the commercial photos, and I adore her. And her name changed, everything changed, and I have to say it has been challenging for me, really has. And I agree with you, Celeste, that this is a time. I think there is something indicative about that whole gender washing through merging that's taking place in our world right now, that we do need to pay attention to. What is that? And we've all been bringing up that I just love the courage to surrender. Thank you for that, Esperide. That's really what I think women need and men need, to surrender to the darkness that's in there as well. We have all of that. You were saying that, Annalise. We have all these sides, and it's all beautiful. It's just that we've named it, and it seems that we've been born into a world that's inverted. We're complementary pairs, right? Meant to work together, and we've taken opposing sides. The light and dark, pleasure, pain, wealth and poverty, masculine and feminine. Our task, I think, is to seek the center, the balance, as we were just talking about, and turn towards our opposite and balance the difference facing us. Be willing to look at what's facing us with compassion and opening our hearts to the other. And then we'll have an ability to create balance. And it does take, Heidi, the reflection and the collective listening. And I'm so grateful for this conversation because it's helping me. I really am at a loss as to, I can't pretend that I understand what's going on with my niece. Because I don't. I'm wanting to, and so the more I open to all of it, as you were saying, Annalise, just opening to whatever is there. I really believe it's a praise deficit that we've had since we were all children. A love deficit and a praise deficit, and everyone you look at has this little child inside who is, oh, can you love me? Can you look at me? Can you see me? And I see that when I look at men who are fearful. It's just fear. What's going on in our world? It's fear that I'm not good enough. I need to bolster myself up and make you see me, and all of those things. And I believe we're being called to strengthen our inner resolve, and outlast this raging siren of fear that's here in our world right now, so we can just touch on our true nature, which I began saying that I feel it's about evolving back into our divine nature and softening that sharpness, of negativity and uncertainty that's happening in our world right now. None of us like, and coming together. It's just time. That's why it's happening.
So I'm mindful of the fact that this question of the roles that we play. What is the role that we play? Because that's the role isn't who you are. The role is the part that you play in response to what the play is that's going on. And in all of our conversation, I'm recognizing that our times are a time of great contraction. That you're describing, each one of you have described a situation that is clearly a contraction, what do they call it? Transition. When I delivered my babies, there was that. Thank God for Ina May Gaskins, who wrote Spiritual Midwifery. She described the relationship. In those days, you were always trying to do breathing to get you through a contraction. And she said, wait a minute, see what the contraction is leading to. The reason you're having a contraction is you're about to have a rush. And to be able to hold both of those during the process actually changed the experience completely for me. That at that point, the contraction is about this rush in the body to be able to open what can't be opened, except in that moment, as you were saying, Annalise. And that we're living in a time, I remember the 70s. I'm sure some of you do. Some of you are too young to remember them, but we were a part of the 70s, the 60s and 70s, which was a time of incredible expansion. And suddenly our roles started to change in response to that. And there was a contraction that came after that. So now we're in a time of great contraction. And so what are our roles now? What are the parts that we play nicely now to meet the mother? I mean, what's happening at large? What's happening in the world? And Esperide, you may have a long-term understanding of what that might mean. Or any of us, they talk about the Kali Yuga, that we're in the middle of the Kali Yuga, the age of iron. What does that mean about what our roles are today?
So, well, it's a big question. I definitely think this is I think in my community, I live in a spiritual community, so this is not just my view, because my personal view, I don't think would have any relevance. But as all of us together, we've been for many, many years immersed in these themes. We definitely feel these are times of great transition, and it's probably obvious to everyone that there is a sort of self-selection going on. Like people now are really asked to choose where they want to be. Do you want to be on the side of fear? And then, there's more and more and more that's being served to us every day. Or do you want to be on the side of courage, which means exactly embracing the fact that we don't know, but we keep going back to our hearts, and we understand that now, and this is probably the key of these times, we feel these are the times in which we are starting to understand that we need to recuperate the archetype of community. We cannot do this together. These are not, maybe in the past years or decades, people thought, I go to a cave in India on my own, I get enlightened. This is not happening. It has not happened. Humanity has not been able to evolve through that system. It's a new time. We can do it, but we can do this together. So I think this is the key transition. If we get this, if we can understand this, then we're going to create together a completely different future. Otherwise, there's going to be more and more disgregation. Also climate change. It's very, very scary, of course, what's happening. On the other hand, we can also think, okay, the earth is also evolving, and we can face this with her, instead of saying we face this against something. And it's a big change in our hearts and how we think. It's not that the volcanoes are stopping to erupt, or we'll have less crisis, but if we tune to the consciousness of the earth, yes, then maybe with her we change, we co-create, and our transition will be softer. Just like you were described that of your birth. It's just an inner posture that changes if we do this together. And together means not just together with humans, with the plants, with the animals, with the planet. I think this is where we're at, and it's crucial.
And I love what you're saying. The we there is to get back to, George is going to be taking this to some men, right? What we're saying. So yes, that's the traditional role, but we do want to include all the parts that are played in that way. But what it does is it says that's one of the things that we want, is to do that together, is to meet the mother together, not separate. That is what is so needed now, is that we find a way to do that together, unified, integrated. Yeah. Celeste, do you have your hand up again, or? Yes, great.
So a couple of things. I get excited. I have a lot of energy that's showing up as I'm listening to you, and the way the conversation thread is moving. Esperide, some things you said are very important to me, and that they followed on a question or a phrase that you used, Heidi, is significant as well. I want to play with a play on words. I heard you ask, Heidi, and what are some of the roles we play nicely at this time? And I understood that to mean, what are some of the things we naturally do well and can bring forward into our communities and into the world? At the same time, I want to say, and I accept how you intended that phrase. It also cued for me this play on words. I'm a woman who grew up in the Southern US, and playing nice has a certain kind of a ring to it that at this point in my selfhood, I want to do this. It's the, I don't want to play nice. I don't want to back down. Don't get up in my face. It's the Mother Kali energy.
Yes.
All right, I'm thinking like this right this moment. We've talked a lot about the generosity of spirit, and I called out benevolence and kindness. But I do want to say that there is a line in this woman and in womanhood with men or maleness, however we want to call that, that says, and go no further. This is a time when the volcanoes are bursting out. How do we play with the mother? And if you cross that line, not just you, male, anyone, here's what's going to happen. There will be fire, like the fire behind me. And you can expect that from me because I do have a boundary. That's the kind of thing I want to talk about sometimes in a context where there's enough safety and capacity to engage that the reality that we as women, I identifying as a woman, as she, I have that too. And I want to say, be ready, because that's going to show up every now and then.
So I have to thank you for pointing that out. I use that term very specifically. That spiritual teacher I told you about many years ago who helped me with my girls and the boys. She called playing, she was a director, she was an actress, and she said playing your part nicely doesn't mean being nice playing your part. It means knowing what the role is now and playing it full. Playing it nicely means playing it full. And that's what you're talking about, Celeste. And that's one of the qualities I love about you, is that when it's time to play full, you're there. You're the emotion, even the anger, the outrage, that there isn't any divergence between what the role is calling from you now and you, right? Even though it is a role, we all know that we're much greater than any of the parts we play. So that's what I mean by playing nicely, but I realized I didn't make that clear. So yeah, but that's really what you're talking about. And it implies a flexibility, which I think we also bring. That's something we also bring to the table, the ability to change as the role changes in the moment, as the need changes in the moment, the ability to move to that one from the one you were just playing, and not apologizing, not who was it? Was it Emerson that said the foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, that we can't be that way in one moment and the next be tender and loving and giving, right? So that flexibility, that we find a way with each other, all of us, to be able to be flexible that way and not be afraid of that, So Analos, you have your hand up, and Sedina.
Thank you. And Celeste, thanks so much for presencing that. That brought up something for me, especially when you talk about the fire, and I've been admiring this fire behind you. I really love that. It's like I'm with you there. It's like you're bringing the fire here. And for me, why this feels so important is because I see that at the heart of our sustainability crisis is a crisis of consciousness, not understanding fire. So when we don't listen, we don't learn the lesson of fire, the mastery of fire from within, we create destructive manifestations of fire, burning fossil fuels, fire through aggression. All of those are not working with the consciousness of fire. And I would love to explore with the man, how the men feel when fire manifests in its maturity and consciousness within women, because so often they're not expecting that element within women, and a lot of women don't expect to have that fire within them, and then when it does come up, either before our menses or our menopause, and when it comes out as anxious and irritated, then sometimes the men say, well, you must be having your period, or rather than looking, oh, hold on here is fire in this woman. And what is this fire seeking to burn away? What is it seeking to express? What is it seeking to also warm up and give clarity to? So I love this exploration about the fire. And as a woman, I have often experienced that when that fire activates, that sometimes the men either feel a little bit like this, or else it turns into a sexual impulse. You know, they go, oh, yeah, great, here's a woman on fire. And it goes to me. And it's difficult then to have the exploration and the conversation. So just saying that bluntly to my brothers, you know, let's explore what it means to have fire manifest within the woman, but also in the conversation and within them, and coming to a new relationship with that element.
What a wild adventure you describe. It's a miracle if any of us get to this age without trauma or having really messed up, right? It really takes a whole, not a village, a whole world to address that, right? Sadina.
Yeah, thank you for that. Angelo says, fantastic. It's true. I really experienced what you just described, you know, just in the wanting to be my whole self, you know, not trying to be mean or any of that. I go through the same thing that you just described. And I think that's a confusion. I feel for men. I have to say that, first of all, I have to put this out here. I feel that I've been implicit as well in some of the abuse that I've had in my life as a woman. And I know that's not something people want to talk about, but I've flaunted myself. I've done things that have attracted that abuse. And like you just described, Annalise, men, how do they know what I'm either angry or I'm sexual? You know, what's going on here? And I love what you brought up, Celeste. It's just fantastic. And I love your spark that comes through, the fire that comes through you always. And it's a really good point that you brought up, that what are we going to do? What is this role, Heidi, that you're talking about, that we can choose? I think it comes back to, we can choose fear, we can choose courage, we can choose to show up as our whole self and be willing to be vulnerable. That willingness to surrender is so huge. All of us, not just men, just can we surrender to the wholeness of who we are, embrace all of who we are, the mistakes, all of it, you know, and love the incomparable person that each one of us is. Because there's no one like us. And that's the gift that we have to give to the world. That's the beauty. And for me, it's about focusing on beauty. With all the fires and everything going on in the world, we can, as you were saying, we can either focus on, oh my God, this is terrible, this is bad, and go against it, or we can move into it and realize this is a gift for me. What is it sharing? You know, what does it have? And what is inside of me that's creating it? That's the big key. Because I think we're dreaming a new realization into being, you know, ultimately a new world. Hopefully, since the world is what we're dreaming in each new moment. Anyway, let's dream wisely and make a difference for ourselves and our world. And we have the ability to do that. The opportunity to reinvent how we live our lives and how we live on the planet. And our future is really dependent on how we dream that into being right now. So I just want to be a part of that. And I want to help men be a part of that. And all of us to come into our courage. I love the Italian translation. Yeah. Thank you for that, Esperide.
Yeah, I just realized listening to you, Sadina, what I want.
Okay.
I want... and what I am totally moved by when it's happening, and it does happen often with the friends and the partners I've chosen, is to be known as the whole possibility, not as the current apparent role that I'm in. It's to be recognized. When I say I want to be gotten, which is how it used to feel when I was younger, want to be gotten, what it means is I want that whoever I'm with remembers who we are in the middle of the act, in the middle of the play, and that's what gets seen and appreciated in the process of our being our many selves, right? It's when that's, I grew up in Japan. I learned Japanese the same time I learned English when I was little. And I always after that had this fear of not being understood in my native language. So, and how that played out was being confused, having my whole self confused with whatever I was saying or doing or being misunderstood to be in the moment. So that's what I got listening to you. That's what I want from men. That's what I want from women. I want the feminine and the masculine. I want that from you, my girlfriends, too, that we're known for who we are as a whole, not for the part we're playing. It's that confusion that is so painful. Anyone else? Oh, Celeste, what do you want? Or what have you got your hand up to say?
Well, they might be the same. I'm not sure. It's the what I want. But it's the what I keep tracing back to as I'm listening to this. I feel like I'm in a river with slow moving water, but we're going downstream together, and in a good way, we're going downstream together. And Esperide, something that you said has stayed with me as I've listened to each of the other women who followed. When you began to speak the last time, you said something like, I have a personal opinion, but I'm not sure that it would have much relevance because that would be only one. And in context with the spiritual community of which I'm part, I do have a sense of long cultivated perspective, something like that. I'm not sure I've summarized it exactly, but that's my takeaway. And I want more of that in our world. I want more of a sense of the way aspen trees connect underground and talk to each other and continue to build like this filament that can't be broken, because that's the way the natural order is. And in the way you describe your community and the way that the collective thought process might be, I don't mean blinders and the groupthink thing. I mean the deeply cultivated sense of we that only can be experienced when all of us bring all of our best. And so that's what I want. I want to experience more of that when I'm with women and men, or people who identify as they for this time on this planet now. I think that's the pathway to peace, is a sense of the collective connective tissue among all of us. And I don't think we'll have peace on this planet or heal with our Mother Earth until we move closer to that connective tissue.
And realize that it's there. Not something we actually see it as there, right? Yeah. Who else? There have been some wonderful comments happening here. It's been hard to keep up with them while also being in the full swing of this wonderful conversation. Dawn says, can we love ourselves and others unconditionally? Can we be willing to be received unconditionally? Which is part of what we're talking about, is how to be able to see that connection you're talking about, Celeste. Just looking to see if there's anything more. Oh, very supportive conversation going on in the chat among our audience. Wonderful.
Heidi, this might be a good point for me to come back in.
Great, Jim. Welcome.
I think we've come to a natural transition. Thank you all so much. This has been very rich and layered. What I thought we could do is first have a comment from George Caponelli, as I mentioned earlier. He has been working with Lion Goodman and myself and a number of others to put together the masculine dialogues coming up. So we thought this would be a good opportunity for him to just, in the first instance, just comment on what he's been hearing from the five of you. Then I have a couple of comments and questions, and then we can bring in some of the points that have been made in the chat group. But George, welcome. What's your sense of things having heard this conversation?
Well, first of all, I really want to celebrate not just the content, but the context of the dialogue that you have just had. It really demonstrates the tremendous value that can come from dialogue when there's really effective, active listening and real-time response to the process. And that's really what dialogue was intended to be, and you've done an admirable job of demonstrating that today. Some things that, and I also want to say what Heidi just said, I want to stress, I've been following the chat, and it has been remarkably mature and engaging and intelligent and complementary to the dialogue that you've been having. And one of these days, Jim, you and I have to figure out a way that the chat can really be fully integrated without the dialogue being disrupted, because there's real gold in both sides of this. I also want to say to each of you who have been active in this that you may not know it yet, but you're all going to play a very active role in the masculine dialogues, if Jim and I have anything to say about it. I want to, some things that jumped up at me quickly. The idea that a new language is allowing a new order to be established. And I think we need to learn more about what that new language is and how it can be used more effectively by all of us who are from other generations and from other languages. Some things you talked about: courage, surrender. Invitation, I think, is a really important word. Not demand, not requirement, but the invitation to remember, as you said, Esperide, that we have all been, both men and women, and that we need to invite each other to remember where that wisdom is in the personal and the collective DNA. Equal and different, highly significant and important. And that's true when it comes to what you were talking about, Celeste, about that fullness, and that we all have to be able to be full. And we all have to be able to recognize that we may not always be comfortable in each other's fullness. And that's something we need to get used to in a variety of ways. I'm reminded of a line from T.S. Eliot where he says, give up sense and notion and kneel. And I think one of the things that would be greatly valuable in our time is if we knelt to ourselves, if we kneel to each other, if we kneel to the great mystery, and recognize that it is in that sense of honoring the sacred that we have the possibility of making this passage. And that without that ability to kneel, something that society has lost, many of us who are men have lost, and unfortunately, many women I know have lost as well. So that ability to kneel to each other can be, I think, magnificent. And And that's all for now. But I thank you for the quality of this dialogue and for what you have each shared from your hearts.
Any comments from any of you?
George, that's a wow too. I mean, how you've taken the flow of our conversation and brought it into such beautiful and different ways of looking at what we were saying. I mean, that's such an example of what we can do for one another, is in that listening to then reflect back something even greater. I mean, the idea of this new language, when I hear you say that, I get really excited. I feel like one of the things that comes from this kind of exploration together is a revivification of language, a real precious appreciation of what the utterance means and can do. As in Esperide's example of courage. Almost every word we use has the power to be unlocked and appreciated in a way that we often don't do. We tend to sediment, what we're hearing and seeing. And I think that dimensionality, I just saw your sculptures this weekend, and what's the positive word of shocking? It was so illuminating to see how space was affected by your view of multiple dimensions. And that's what you're talking about in a conversation. It's like a piece of music or sculpture that allows us to have a whole new appreciation of the life that's available every moment. So I thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'd like to bring in another dimension, and Esperide, I'd like to have you start the comment, but I'd like to bring in the archetypal dimension for our consideration in the following way. As women have gone through the process of liberation over the last, say, century, starting with the suffragettes, but more dramatically beginning in the 1960s, there were numerous examples throughout history of women standing up to patriarchal power. And the liberation of women, therefore, has been an externalization of presencing into the global culture that has been rather uneven. We're seeing in Afghanistan today what happens when women's liberation meets patriarchal power. But if you look at the experience of the men, there has been confusion. I would say there's been a paucity of archetypal examples for men to orient attitudes and behavior around. And that's one of the reasons why in studies all around the world, while women are being empowered in school and vocationally, boys in particular and young men have been confused and engaged in all kinds of delinquency, shall we say, and the indicators around social maladaptation have been stronger with boys and young men than girls. And so I think that the men have in some ways gone in the opposite direction of women, but without the wise counsel of examples through history, or even in a contemporary way to a large extent. And the results of that have been powerfully felt. I mean, one of the people in the chat box was talking about this addiction of young men around pornography, for example. That's an indication of lostness, of uncertainty of how do you actually express your maleness in the world, given the collapse of a very clear and rigid patriarchal form. And Esperide, I just want to note that you were very helpful to me as I was thinking about this some years ago by bringing into my awareness the archetype of Pan. And, Esperide said, we think of the earth as Gaia, but the earth is Gaia, but the earth is also Pan. The earth is masculine as well as feminine dimensions, but we almost never think about that. And that's part of the problem. If men are going to reach the wholeness that we all seek and be able to get up from their knees, as George is recommending, in some kind of a authentic way, they need models out of the collective unconscious that empower them to do that in a way that's consistent with a more holistic future. So Esperide, I'd love for you to just say a little bit more about Pan and the emergence of that, of the green man and that archetypal formation, because the community at Damanhur, there in northern Italy, has spent a lot of time studying this. And I think it'd be worth bringing that into our contemplation, and then whatever comments the others of you would like to make.
Thank you, Jim. I would like to say first, if I may, that if we look at the spiritual journey of humanity, not men and women, all of us together, I would say that patriarchy has been really bad for both men and women, because even though apparently men were in power, actually they lost all their power. As you're saying, they were slaves of a certain boxed way of having to behave, but actually men have lost the deep meaning, what it means to embody the masculine principle, which is, I think, why now women, because for women it was more evident. So now we are taking back the space, we feel the presence of the goddess more and more. Yet men are being very confused because that part of the divine masculine is not being anchored, because apparently men were in power. I think everyone was powerless in this last configuration of humanity. So this said, because I think it's important, otherwise we keep putting this into a polarity that I really don't think it really existed. This was dark for all of us. It's just outer behavior that, women embodied, souls embodied in women's bodies suffered more, but we all suffered because this has been, our divinity has been severed for both of us, no matter what body we were using in all these thousands of years. So one of the things that it's important, I feel, in this time is to bring back fully the divine masculine, as we've been speaking about the goddess for so many years. And one of the powerful archetypes is also that, looking at the earth, our planet, surely there is Gaia, the mother. But as we were speaking about as the womb, the contraction, the expansion, Gaia, the feminine principles, needs to be impregnated by a masculine principle. We need the life force of the masculine. So Pan, that very interesting, in ancient Greece, Pan meant the everything, because it was the life force, that a spirit that the Native American also sometimes called Manitou, but that idea that all life has a spirit that keeps it alive. And that's what also brings life to the goddess, to Gaia. It's very important to bring back, because then we can really see that we constantly dance together. Pan, as the whole, is also the god of the nature spirits. So when we embrace the idea that there is this sacred masculine, for instance, ecology does not become something that we do because then on the practical material level things are better, because something that we do because it's the first step in a dialogue with the forces that oversee climate, that oversee that we can cultivate the land because we give back to them. So we bring back a sacredness that is really linked to the generative masculine principle. But if we forget that, and we have forgotten this because Pan, as Christianity, became less and less close to the original message of the Christ, of that love, but became more of an institution, started, to take away the sacredness of nature. But that was not just against the feminine, it was also against the divine masculine. So much so that Pan became identified with the devil. And so we have this complete split within ourselves and in the way we relate to the forces of the cosmos as they manifest in their dance on our planet.
Bravo.
Sorry, it was a long answer, but it's...
No.
It was a good one.
And it's worth just noting, just because I think that it's such an important motif for men to have available to them. To fill out a little bit more of the story of Pan, he was quite prominent in the Greco-Roman world for the reasons that Esperide described. And then in about the 3rd century, with the rise of Christianity, if you read some of the ancient authors, Pan intentionally went underground. He realized that his time was up, given the emergence of Christianity and its dogmatism in the world. But there was a promise to return. And as Esperide said, he became a diabolic figure in the Christian way of understanding things. But then in the middle of the 20th century, he began to emerge again. And very interestingly, he emerged through Findhorn and Peter Caddy. And there's a very interesting book that one could read, Talking with Fairies, where a clairvoyant there in England began to be visited by Pan. And Pan was saying, I'm back. The world needs me now in a very, very powerful way. And won't go into any more details, but I think it's worth just noting that as the archetypal formations around the goddess, around Gaia, I just think of how the goddess Gaia emerged out of Jim Lovelock's book Gaia, and how all of a sudden it just burst into collective consciousness. Pan did too, but in a still very subliminal, unformed way. And I just wanted to bring this point in that as we approach the masculine dialogues and what it means to be embrace the masculine through the male biology, shall we say, there's a lot of work that we still have to do to surface with equal clarity available now to women, for men to find a place of such security and authentic, I would say, presencing, that there's a true egalitarian kind of matrix within which we can all participate. So that's part of the work that we want to surface in our own small way, of course, through the masculine dialogues, of course, but it's an important one, I think, globally for men at this moment.
Are there any, as we get close to the conclusion of this, are there any closing comments that you would like to make, any of you who have been so valuable in this dialogue process?
I'd like to hear a minute or two from everyone.
Yeah. Celeste is, no? Yes?
Yeah, I've been thinking how enormously rich this soup we're making is. And I keep feeling a need to hear from the ancestors who don't look like us.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder about people with brown and darker skin and from different cultures. I know that sometimes I bring this up a lot in these kinds of forums, but when I think about what we mean by masculine and feminine, by archetypes, I want to ask the question, whose narrative and whose archetypes? And what is possible to bring in a wider angle lens So I value deeply what is happening here and what we are sharing. And I want to hear from the people who have equally ancient roots and world systems.
You'll find that I'm sorry, but you'll find that in the masculine dialogues, we're doing our best to widen that lens dramatically. So
I know you're working on that, and I affirm that. I appreciate it very much.
I'll speak up. What comes up to me as you were speaking, Jim, and Esperide's story and the power of myth. Myth has always been central in our lives, and I notice in the grandchildren, there's nothing they'd rather have than a great story of a different kind, different kinds of heroes. But what's really coming up for me, and I now understand why this became so alive when the grandchildren were born, is the power of ritual. Of we started lighting candles every Friday night in our family. Some of the people are Jewish, some of them are not, but we started lighting candles as a family activity. We started telling stories that brought all of my brothers and all of their children together every Wednesday afternoon about the stories of our ancestors and where they had lived. And we did that through COVID, when one of my nephews was dying of liver cancer and his son was going to be without a father at the age of 7. We gathered together and told, it was like being around the fire that you have there, Celeste. It was like being around a fire and having a ritual of telling stories about making it, about how we made it. And now I realize why that's so important. The ritual holds those stories as a present day experience too. So thank you.
I'd like to just say thank you so much. First of all, Heidi, I vicariously get to have a family experience through your family. I'm the oldest of 8 kids, and my family's in the Bay Area, and I miss them tremendously. And I love the Facebook photos and hearing your stories and just the way you interact with your grandchildren and your kids. So I so appreciate that. And for your question, Jim, to Esperide, what an illuminating thing to hear about Pan. And I had forgotten this, archetype, and I really appreciate hearing that. And it's so true that that divine masculine, which Pan represents, is within all of us. And I'll just go back to that because that's, to me, the most important piece. In fact, there was a chat comment that I really meant to mention before. Someone said the feminine revolution didn't teach women how to become whole, and it's so true. It in so many ways separated us. And I really look at it like a pendulum swinging, and that we're coming back into balance little by little. And some of it is not subtle at all. It's painful. And so be it. That we are, we're in a birthing process. We're in a transformation, and that can be very painful. The more that I believe what you talked about, the sacredness, if we can focus on our sacredness, my heart goes out to young men, young people everywhere who are committing suicide, who don't know where they can go. I keep thinking of the ancestors, Celeste, from all different ancient and indigenous origins, whose wisdom we really need. That's what we need right now, and we're missing, and we've forgotten to tap into it. And our work with Age Nation is about that. There's that social adaptation for young men. I really feel for that. I just how we can bring in that universal feminine and masculine within us all, and really know that this is a joint effort. We can do this together. So I can't tell you how grateful I am for having been a part of this. It's just enriching my life. Thank you.
I'd like to weave with that and also add my thanks. And also, Heidi, thank you so much for the way you facilitated that, and all my sisters here while we've been creating this weaving, and Jim and George as well for your courage. I'm also, Jim and George, very curious about your feelings. So I heard very beautiful, powerful reflections. I would also love to, if you can share with us how you felt, what emotions moved through you while you were in the field of this conversation, because you were part of the field and therefore you were part of everything that was unfolding, even while you were not speaking at that time. You know, we sensed you. So I'd love to hear about your feelings. And I appreciate indeed also that archetype of Pan. It reminds me in my culture of the great deer and some of the Druidic traditions also, where of the high priest and the high priestess and their fertility rites, especially to, so that nature could keep, you know, renewing itself. And so in those traditions, the woman and the man initiate each other. You can't do it without the other one. So also be very curious to see in the male conversation, the male dialogues, what are you seeing as also the rituals that help to both awaken and initiate the sacred masculine, and support its next stage of evolution as well, which then flows back to all of us as well, and how you feel then that we as women also can support you know, those rituals. And my deep thanks to everyone here. And yeah, I feel really in a very quiet place right now of just awe and appreciation and love and respect. Thank you.
Esperide.
Oh, I just spoke so much. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you to all of you. And I want to repeat something that I heard someone say, Heidi said it to George, but I also want to say to George and to the other ladies and you, Jim, because whenever you mention something that I said, I heard it in a much more beautiful and more profound way. So your reflection and me on what I said made me go like, wow.
Analyst, just to briefly respond to your question. From a feeling standpoint, I found...
So, well, for what you were...
Oops.
I'm sorry. You weren't complete, please.
Yeah, sorry. I had a little cut out sometimes. Did you hear me till the end?
Yes.
I think so.
I think
Okay.
so, yes.
Thank you.
The word that comes to mind is, words that come to mind is, I had a feeling of peace as well. I found nothing that any of you said to be controversial. I found it to be honoring and illuminating and honest and integrous. So that was my experience during the process from a feeling standpoint. I was also honored by your honesty and your acknowledgement from the beginning that we are both genders and that it's important to remember that. So for the moment, in terms of rituals, that's a longer conversation, but in any event, thank you for the question.
Good. Well, thank you all. Just to comment on your question, Analos, I think anytime a man is in a group of women talking about men, there's a instinctive trepidation, particularly given our history, that almost anything you would say would be true. And any lashing would be well deserved. And any inclusivity is humbly and gratefully accepted. So I think it's always with mixed emotions. that I at least engage in these things, and I want to just say that, and I think the net of this conversation is one feeling very enriched and very grateful that there's such extraordinary maturity. You've all represented, I think, a pathway to the future that's been galvanized out of deep experience that you've all had, through the vicissitudes of world culture. Just yesterday, or over the last couple of days, they've announced that the new Superman is going to come out as bisexual. And when I heard that, I said, yes, finally an archetype that really represents the contemporary mobility and fluidity in the hero. And so I think there's a lot of joy also that I'm feeling as a result of this conversation, and also the movement, the foment that's happening in the domain of sexuality and gender that is profoundly important for all of us to embrace and seek to understand as much as we can, whatever our vantage point is. So I'm very grateful. And we've tried over the last 6 months, everyone, to have a multiplicity of views on the male and masculinity. This is our last one, as I indicated. And then for 5 days, 2 sessions a day, between the 15th and the 19th of November, we're going to be delving very deeply into these issues. And we hope that all of you will be present in some form during that time. That would enrich our conversations, and we'll keep everybody posted on that. And we have a very powerful Humanity Rising coming up, because starting the 1st through the 12th of November, we're going to be focusing on the Conference of Parties in Glasgow as the world wrestles with what it does with our reality that we're in code red for humanity, given the climate crisis. And then as soon as that is over, we're going to be rolling into the masculine dialogue. So it's going to be very multidimensional, heady, and also very heartful, I think, as we wrestle with these profound issues. Then just before we close, just a note that as we close out the week here, tomorrow we're going to continue our conversation about health. Probably public health has been the single most important domain in human culture affected by the pandemic. Physically, mentally, and globally, our health has been fractured. And so we've had a series of panels on public health during this time of COVID. And then on Friday, we're going to have a dialogue with Ray Moody, who's the great Thanatos, thanatologist of our day, whose Life After Life was an international bestseller, and is credited with really opening up the exploration of death and dying with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and others. And he'll be joining us for a dialogue on Friday. But George, you wanted to add something?
I would invite all of us who have been privileged to be part of this program today, and all of you who are on the chat. There are replays of this particular program on YouTube, and that link will be available. And I would really encourage you to share it with people on your list. I think it's been an extraordinary conversation, well worth exposing to many more people, so that they can get a glimpse of what's possible in this terrain. So thank you.
Yeah, in a couple hours, it'll go up on the Ubiquity YouTube channel and be available for everyone, as George mentioned. So thank you, everyone. Heidi, Esperide, Analos, Sedina, Celeste, marvelous job, and look forward to having you back for a deeper dive in November.
Thank you, Jim and George.
Thank you. And Heidi, and all of you. It was such a pleasure.
Bye for now. See you
Bye.
tomorrow.
Bye bye.